It was supposed to be just another routine mission, another day of scientific exploration in a distant corner of the galaxy. But for the crew of the research station Pioneer, orbiting a collapsing star at the edge of known space, it would become the discovery of a lifetime. Dr. Elena Voss, the lead scientist, had been the first to detect it. A faint, almost imperceptible signal coming from the heart of the dying star, a brief anomaly that didn't match any known energy signatures. It wasn't much at first, just a blip on the radar, but it sparked her curiosity. "Captain, you need to see this," she called over the comms, her voice barely masking the excitement that had slowly built within her. She was no stranger to strange readings, but this felt different. Captain Ren Bradford, a seasoned veteran of deep space exploration, was immediately by her side in the lab. "What have you got, Elena?" he asked, his voice steady, though there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes. Elena pointed to the screen, where a complex pattern of energy pulses flickered across the display. "I don't know yet, but it's unlike anything we've encountered. It's not a normal stellar phenomenon, and it's not any kind of transmission either. It's like something is resonating within the star itself." Bradford studied the readings, leaning closer to the monitor. There was a pattern, yes, but one that defied all logic. Could it be a message from another civilization? He asked, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. The idea of alien contact was a thrill, but it also brought with it endless complications. "I don't think so," Elena replied, shaking her head. "It doesn't fit any of the usual signatures, but whatever it is, it's something we need to investigate. It's too precise." The Pioneer wasn't built for long expeditions into the heart of a collapsing star, but Bradford knew that if there was even a chance of finding something that could change the course of human history, they had to take that risk. They were already in deep space. What was one more dangerous detour? He made the decision quickly. "Prepare an extraction team. We're going in." The Pioneer's shuttle, Cassandra, descended toward the star's innermost reaches, a turbulent and hostile environment. The crew suited up in their advanced space gear, each step an act of preparation for the unknown. As they approached, the forces of the collapsing star sent violent shockwaves through the shuttle's hull, rattling the crew as they braced for impact. Elena's pulse quickened. She knew they were on the precipice of something unprecedented. "What exactly are we looking for?" Bradford asked as he gripped his harness tightly, his eyes locked on the swirling chaos outside the shuttle's reinforced windows. "I'm not sure," Elena replied, her voice steady but filled with wonder. "But whatever it is, it's deep inside the star's core. If I'm right, it could be the reason why this star is collapsing in the first place. It might even be what's keeping it alive longer than it should." As they descended deeper into the gravity well of the star, the turbulence intensified. The shuttle's sensors began to blink frantically, trying to compensate for the intense radiation and gravitational pull. But then, just as Elena had predicted, they began to see it, something gleaming, almost luminescent, deep within the swirling mass of collapsing plasma. "There, do you see it?" Elena's voice cracked with disbelief. Bradford squinted. A shape began to emerge from the roiling mass, a solid object that didn't belong in the midst of such chaos. It was metallic, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Not a natural formation, but something engineered. The ship's instruments confirmed it. The metal was not of any known material. The surface was unlike anything human technology had produced, its properties almost otherworldly. "That's impossible," Bradford muttered. "There's no way that's natural. But if it's out there, it might be the key to everything." The shuttle carefully hovered above the object, its engines straining against the immense gravity. Elena's eyes widened as she observed the core of the star shift, almost as if the metal itself was influencing the star's behavior. It was like the two forces were linked. "We need to bring it aboard," she said, her voice thick with awe. "I've never seen anything like it. It could be a breakthrough, something that could change everything. Material science, energy production, even physics." Bradford's eyes were sharp. He knew the dangers of unchecked curiosity, but he could also see the magnitude of the discovery. All right, we'll bring it in. But let's not get too hasty. I'm not risking the entire station for a hunch. The crew carefully maneuvered the shuttle closer, using every tool at their disposal to carefully extract the strange object. As the metal was slowly lifted from the star's core, it began to hum. A deep, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. Elena felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Whatever this metal was, it wasn't just extraordinary. It was alive in a way she couldn't explain. And as the object was pulled into the shuttle's cargo bay, a sudden, strange thought crossed her mind. What if we aren't the first to discover it? Before she could voice her concerns, the shuttle's sensors beeped urgently. Bradford's face went pale as he scanned the readings on his console. "We've got company," he said, his voice taut with alarm. Above them, the darkness of space shifted. Stars flickered out of existence as 3 alien ships appeared, their silhouettes massive and menacing against the backdrop of the collapsing star. The first wave had arrived. The alien ships emerged from the void like predators stalking their prey. 3 massive vessels, each shaped like jagged, menacing obelisks, their hulls bristling with weaponry that made Cassandra look like an insect in comparison. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the enemy ships on the shuttle's view screen. The Pioneer had no way of defending itself against such firepower. Even with their advanced technology, they were hopelessly outmatched. Captain Bradford's fingers flew across the shuttle's controls, desperately trying to stabilize their trajectory. He turned to the crew, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "We need to get out of here now. Prepare to jump back to Pioneer. We can't afford to stay in this gravity well with those ships closing in." Elena's eyes were wide as she looked at the alien vessels. She knew they had to leave immediately, but there was something else gnawing at her. Something wasn't right. These ships had appeared out of nowhere, as if they had been waiting for the moment the metal was extracted. "Captain," Elena said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. "What if they're not here for the shuttle? What if they're after Astrium?" Bradford's face hardened. He didn't need to ask what she meant. He was already beginning to suspect that the alien ships weren't here to investigate a scientific anomaly. They were here for the metal. And with good reason. If Astrium truly had the properties Elena had theorized, it could change the balance of power across the entire galaxy. "Can we get a closer scan?" Bradford asked, his focus never wavering. Elena began working quickly, tapping commands into the console. The Cassandra sensors were primitive compared to the advanced tech on the Pioneer, but they still gave her enough data to make a chilling realization. The ships were not just orbiting the collapsing star. They were in direct communication with something within its core. The frequency they were emitting was like a beacon, locking onto the energy readings from Astrium. "They're not just monitoring us," Elena said, voice low with disbelief. "They're tracking the metal. They've known about it all along." Bradford's brow furrowed. "How could they have known? We just discovered it." Elena shook her head. "I don't know, but it looks like they've been waiting for someone. Anyone. To find it." "The Veshtari," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. "It has to be them." The name sent a ripple of unease through the crew. The Veshtari were a shadowy alien race known for their merciless conquests and subjugation of weaker species. They were the kind of enemy that didn't leave survivors, and their ships were equipped with technology light years ahead of anything humanity had ever seen. It wasn't just the Astrium they were after. It was a weapon, a key to power beyond comprehension. Bradford's hand clenched around the controls, his knuckles white. "We can't let them have it. We need to get back to the Pioneer. And fast." Before anyone could react, a loud, ominous hum reverberated through the shuttle. The alien ships had locked onto them. And without warning, a powerful pulse of energy shot out from the lead vessel, cutting through the space between them with blinding speed. "Brace for impact," Bradford shouted. The shuttle shuddered violently as the energy blast struck the rear shields. The protective field flickered and sparked, But it held, just barely. The shields were designed for atmospheric entry, not for a full assault by alien weapons. The shuttle began to spin out of control, pulled by the immense gravitational forces of the collapsing star. Thrusters are offline. We're losing control. One of the crew members yelled. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the view screen. The Veshtari ships weren't just going to let them go. They wanted the Astrium, and they would stop at nothing to get it. We can't outrun them. Alina cried out. We'll be caught in the gravity well. If we don't jump now, we're done for. Bradford's face was set with determination. We don't have a choice. Activate the jump drive. Now. The shuttle's engines flared, sputtered, and roared back to life. But it wasn't enough to overcome the pull of the star. They were drifting closer to its edge, the pull of its gravity becoming irresistible. The Pioneer was still miles away, its rescue ships barely within reach. As the shuttle hurtled toward the event horizon, Bradford grabbed hold of the control panel with a grim sense of resolve. Alina, get to the back of the shuttle. We need to prepare for emergency ejection if we can't break free. Alina hesitated. She glanced back at the Astrium sample, safely contained in the cargo hold. That metal, humanity's salvation, or its doom, was the reason they were here. It was the only reason the Veshtari had come, and it was now their most valuable possession. The shuttle bucked again, and Alina's mind raced. We can't let them have it. As the stars outside twisted and stretched, becoming streaks of light, Alina knew one thing with certainty. This was no longer just a mission. It was a fight for the future of humanity itself. The shuttle Cassandra lurched violently, the gravitational forces growing stronger with every passing second. Bradford's grip tightened on the controls as he fought to maintain any semblance of control, but the reality was undeniable. They were being pulled into the heart of the collapsing star. The Pioneer was still too far away. Even if they could eject now, the chances of survival were slim. Jump drive, Captain. Alina shouted over the din of the shuttle's alarms. We need to jump out of here, now. Bradford's jaw clenched. The Cassandra was a relic of a bygone era, designed for basic transport and research missions, not for escaping the brutal forces of a collapsing star and an alien assault. The jump drive wasn't powerful enough to make the escape, not unless they had an immediate direct link to the Pioneer's hyperdrive system, and that wasn't possible without a secure comms relay. Damn it, Bradford muttered, his mind racing. He punched the comms console, but static filled the air. He couldn't reach Pioneer. They were on their own. Then, the Veshtari made their move. A new energy pulse lashed out from one of their massive ships. This time, the blast wasn't aimed at the shuttle's shields, but directly at its engines. The sudden shockwave rocked the shuttle, and the metallic groan of the hull being stressed to its breaking point reverberated through the small craft. The engine sputtered, and for a moment, the entire crew held their breath, praying the system would hold. But it didn't. The shuttle's engines failed completely, leaving them adrift in space, helpless as the Veshtari vessels, encircled them like vultures around their prey. Alina could see it all unfolding on the view screen. The massive alien ships, their sleek black hulls cutting through the void with an almost predatory grace. The Cassandra was now a sitting duck, its shields flickering and faltering. No way to escape. Bradford gritted his teeth. We can't wait for Pioneer to reach us. The Veshtari are closing in. We need to defend ourselves. Alina's mind raced. She had no training in combat. She was a scientist, a researcher. But she understood one thing. If they didn't do something, they were dead. The alien ships would board them, and whatever Astrium they had, it would be theirs. The Veshtari weren't known for mercy. Without another word, Alina ran to the back of the shuttle. There, in the cargo hold, the sample of Astrium rested in a containment chamber, still humming with energy. The metal was glowing faintly, pulsing as though it was alive. Captain, I've got the Astrium. Alina called over the comms as she grabbed the chamber. What's our plan? Get back to the cockpit. Fast. I have an idea, Bradford replied, his voice tight with urgency. Elena didn't hesitate. She clutched the containment chamber with both hands and sprinted back toward the cockpit, where Bradford was already preparing their final defense. As she entered, she saw him struggling to interface with the shuttle's control panel, trying to modify the ship's limited weaponry with whatever resources they had left. "What's the plan?" Elena asked, her breath coming in short bursts. "I'm going to override the shuttle's power grid," Bradford said quickly. "We're going to overload the weapons system and create a pulse, something that'll fry their comms and their targeting systems long enough for us to make a break for it. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we've got." Elena nodded, still clutching the astrium. "I'm with you. Let's do it." As Bradford worked furiously at the console, Elena took a deep breath and placed the containment chamber next to him. The astrium seemed to hum louder now, as if reacting to the intensity of the moment. She couldn't help but notice the odd resonance of the metal, the way it seemed to draw energy from its surroundings. "Ready," Bradford said, his fingers flying across the console, activating every system in a last-ditch attempt to overload the shuttle's power grid. "This is going to be close." Before Elena could respond, a bright light filled the cockpit. An energy beam shot out from the Veshtari ship closest to them, aimed directly at the shuttle's hull. Bradford hit a button, and the pulse emitted from the shuttle's weapon system with a blinding flash. For a split second, everything went silent. The pulse was a chaotic, violent burst of energy that rippled through the void, its power surging into the Veshtari ship's comms and targeting systems. The alien ships staggered for a moment, their systems temporarily disabled. Elena gasped. It worked. Bradford didn't waste time. "Not yet. We need to go. Now." He threw the shuttle into full reverse, pushing the remaining power to its absolute limit. The shuttle's engines groaned in protest, but they surged forward, moving away from the Veshtari ships. Bradford's hands trembled as he fought to maintain control. The jump drive wasn't far, but it was their only chance. The Veshtari ships weren't disabled for long. Their targeting systems rebooted, and they were already beginning to retaliate. Plasma bolts from their cannons lit up the void, narrowly missing the shuttle as it darted toward the safety of the outer edge of the gravity well. Bradford's eyes locked onto the comm screen. "Pioneer, do you read us?" The seconds dragged on like hours as the shuttle struggled to evade the alien fire. Then, finally, a response crackled through the static. "Cassandra, we've got you. Hold tight. We're coming for you." Elena didn't allow herself to exhale in relief. Not yet. The battle had only just begun. The brief flicker of hope from Pioneer's response was enough to steady their nerves, just for a moment. As the shuttle Cassandra veered away from the pursuing Veshtari ships, Bradford continued to push the failing engines to their limits. The ship shook violently as the proximity to the collapsing star increased, but the shuttle was still accelerating toward the outer limits of the gravity well. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and anticipation. The Veshtari had retreated, but only momentarily. They would be back, and next time, they wouldn't be so easily deterred. The Cassandra was limping, barely hanging on. With no shields and minimal propulsion, they couldn't outrun them forever. "Pioneer, are you tracking us?" Bradford's voice was tight as he monitored their systems. His eyes were fixed on the communication array. A moment passed before a response came through. The voice of Commander Grace Hale, Pioneer's first officer, came through the comms. "We're tracking you, Captain. We've deployed a rescue craft. Hang in there. ETA. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. They didn't have that long." Elena looked at the astrium chamber, the source of all this chaos, sitting inert on the floor beside her. She couldn't help but feel the strange hum of the metal vibrating through the shuttle's hull. It was as though it was reacting to the tension, to the very air around it. The Veshtari hadn't just come for the metal. They needed it. But why? What was so important about it? She turned to Bradford. "Captain, I need to know something. What exactly is astrium? How can something like this exist? If it's really as powerful as I think, why haven't we heard of it before? Bradford's face was grim as he continued to pilot the shuttle away from the black hole's pull. He avoided looking at her directly, though he understood the question all too well. I don't know, Elena. But I can tell you one thing. It's not natural. Whatever it is, it was put there for a reason. Elena frowned, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. She needed more answers, not vague reassurances. And then she remembered something. The records from their initial scans. The astrium hadn't just been locked away in the core of the star. It had been placed there. The data had been clear. Someone, some entity, had deliberately hidden it within the star system. Before she could voice her thoughts, another voice echoed through the shuttle's comm system, cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is Commander Zarek of the Enter," the voice said, smooth and cold. "You have something that belongs to us." Elena froze, her hand instinctively tightening around the astrium chamber. She glanced at Bradford, whose face was ashen. He didn't have to say it. The look on his face said it all. The Enter. The name sent a chill down Elena's spine. The Enter were ancient, older than the Veshtari, older than any race known to the Galactic Council. Little was known about them, except that they had disappeared from the galaxy eons ago, leaving behind only ruins, whispers, and cautionary tales. They were rumored to have created the astrium, a metal of limitless potential, but they had vanished before anyone could truly understand its purpose. "Enter," Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Are they alive? How is that possible?" Bradford's expression darkened. They shouldn't be. They were thought to have wiped themselves out during an ancient war. But if they're here, it means one thing. They knew about astrium long before we did. And they left it behind for a reason. There was a long pause before the voice of Commander Zarek came again, more menacing this time. "You are in possession of something far beyond your understanding. The astrium is not for your kind to wield. It was never meant for you. Return it to us, or face the consequences." Elena felt a cold sweat break out on her brow. The Enter were not offering a negotiation. They were demanding the return of astrium. Bradford clenched his fists around the controls. "We're not handing it over, Zarek. You'll have to destroy us first." A dark chuckle echoed through the comms. "Very well, Captain. It's your choice. But know this, the astrium was never meant to be wielded by mortals. The balance of the universe will tip in ways you cannot begin to understand. You will regret this." And then, the transmission cut off. Silence filled the shuttle. Elena stared at the small containment chamber holding the metal, still humming, its soft glow casting strange shadows on the walls. It was a weapon. She could feel it. Whatever the Enter had intended for astrium, it was not meant for humanity to use. Yet here they were, with the most powerful material in the universe. But what did that mean for them? If the Enter were truly back, and if astrium had been hidden to test a species' worthiness, then humanity's very survival could depend on the decisions they made next. "I don't think we can keep this, Captain," Elena said softly, though she already knew it was too late. "If the Enter are truly behind this, they won't stop until they get it back. And if they think we're unworthy." Bradford's gaze never wavered from the view screen as he maneuvered the shuttle toward the rescue ship. "We'll deal with that when the time comes. Right now, our priority is to get this back to the Pioneer safely. We can't let the Veshtari or the Enter get their hands on it." But even as he spoke, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a game far more dangerous than they realized. The astrium was powerful, but perhaps it was also a curse, one that could doom humanity as much as it could save them. The shuttle continued to shake as it raced toward the Pioneer, the roar of its engines straining against the collapsing star's gravity. The light from the dying sun outside flickered as though in response to the mounting tension. Every second felt like an eternity. The Veshtari had not followed, but that didn't mean they were safe, not by a long shot. And the Enter were still out there, watching, waiting. Alina's thoughts were a whirlwind as she stared at the containment chamber. The astrium, it was their greatest find, but also their greatest threat. Whatever Zarek and his people had intended for the metal, it had to be something far more profound than mere power. Astrium wasn't just a material, it was a tool, a key, and humanity, in all its arrogance, had just unlocked it. "Captain," Alina began, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation, "we need to prepare for what's coming. The Enter won't just let this go, and I have a feeling they won't stop at mere threats." Bradford's expression hardened, but he didn't look at her. His focus remained on the shuttle's navigation, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his thoughts. "I'm aware, Alina, but right now, our priority is getting this back to the Pioneer and getting out of this system. After that, we'll reassess." Alina wasn't convinced. The Pioneer wasn't built to fight against the likes of the Veshtari or the Inter. It was a research vessel, not a warship. Even if they could get the Astrium back to their flagship, how could they protect it? How could they survive whatever storm was coming? "Captain," she said again, a little more forcefully, "you need to understand. If we keep this metal, we're taking a huge risk. We've got the Veshtari and the Inter both after us. If we don't have a way to defend ourselves—" "I know," Bradford cut her off, his tone sharper than before. "But I'm not about to give it back, Alina. Not to the Veshtari. Not to the Enter. Not after everything we've gone through to get it." He exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand across his face. "If we can't protect it, we'll be wiped out. And I'm not going to let that happen." The shuttle's hull groaned, and the warning lights blinked again as they entered the outer atmosphere of the Pioneer. A soft voice crackled through the comms. "Cassandra, this is Pioneer. We have you locked in. Prepare for docking." Relief surged through Alina's veins. They were almost there, but that relief was short-lived. The Veshtari had been silent for too long. Something was wrong. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were just waiting for the right moment. Bradford switched to the external comms, his voice calm but urgent. "Commander Hale, we need to move quickly. Get a secure hold on the Cassandra and prepare for immediate departure. We're not alone." A brief pause. "Understood, Captain. We've got the docking bay ready. We'll secure you as soon as you're aboard." As the shuttle neared the Pioneer, Alina felt the cold weight of the Astrium's presence more than ever. This wasn't just a race to escape. It was a race to survive. No sooner had they docked than the bay doors slid open, and Bradford guided the shuttle inside with all the precision he could muster. Once the shuttle's landing gear locked into place, the crew rushed to secure the containment chamber with the Astrium in it. Alina was the first to step off the shuttle, her boots hitting the deck of the Pioneer with a heavy thud. She wasn't sure if it was the gravity of the situation or the weight of the metal in her hands, but the air felt thick, oppressive. Commander Hale was waiting for them at the docking bay, her face drawn but resolute. "Captain," she greeted, her gaze flicking to the containment chamber, then to the rest of the crew. "We've received transmissions from the Veshtari. They're demanding immediate surrender of the Astrium. They're already mobilizing forces toward our location." Bradford's face tightened as Hale spoke. The Veshtari had wasted no time. They were making their move, and it was clear that whatever power the Astrium held, the Veshtari needed it badly. "Where's the nearest secure area for the metal?" Alina asked, her voice steady. Hale turned toward the security officer standing near the entrance to the bay. "Lieutenant Voss, get the containment chamber to the secure vault in Hangar Bay 3. We'll lock it down until we figure out our next move." Alina was about to respond when the entire station shuddered. The lights flickered, and the hum of the Pioneer's engines seemed to falter for a brief moment. "What's going on?" Bradford demanded, already on alert. Hale's eyes narrowed, scanning her console. "We're being targeted. The Veshtari are firing. Shields are holding, but they're using heavy firepower. The next round is going to breach the outer hull if we don't respond." Alina's stomach dropped. They didn't have the weaponry to engage the Veshtari. They were sitting ducks. "Captain," Hale continued, "we need to make a decision. We either fight, or we surrender the Astrium. But make no mistake, we won't survive if we don't fight back. The Veshtari won't stop until they have it." Bradford was silent for a long moment, his eyes dark with the weight of the decision he knew had to be made. Then, finally, he spoke. "Prepare the defense systems. We fight." The stakes were higher than ever, and Elena realized that the battle for humanity's survival wasn't just about the Astrium anymore. It was about proving that they wouldn't bend to the will of those who would see them destroyed. The Pioneer trembled as another barrage of energy blasts from the Veshtari ship struck its hull. The station's outer shields flared brightly, absorbing the incoming hits, but each impact sent vibrations through the decks, rattling the crew to their core. "Shields at 60%, Lieutenant Voss reported urgently from his console, his fingers flying over the controls. "The Veshtari are relentless. They're increasing firepower." Bradford stood with his back to the viewport, staring out at the void where the enemy ships loomed like dark, inevitable death. The massive obelisks of the Veshtari fleet were positioned just outside the Pioneer's weapons range, carefully maneuvering, preparing for the final push to breach their defenses. "We won't last long with shields like that," Bradford muttered, his voice cold with determination. "How much longer until we're in range to return fire?" 5 minutes, Voss answered, his face taut with stress. "But at this rate, we'll have no shields left by the time we can hit them. They'll breach the hull before we can retaliate." Bradford glanced over at Elena, who was standing by the door to the security vault, where the Astrium was being locked away. She was watching the chaos unfold, her gaze fixed on the holographic map of the battle. "Elena," Bradford said, his voice steady but strained, "we need to figure out a way to buy us more time. Do you have any ideas?" Elena met his gaze, her mind working at a fever pitch. The Veshtari were advanced, with weapons capable of overwhelming them, but there had to be something they could do to slow them down. She remembered something. The pulse they had unleashed from the shuttle's weapon systems. It had disabled their targeting and comms briefly. Maybe they could use that same strategy again, but on a larger scale. "I think we have an option," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "We have to tap into the Pioneer's reactor systems. If we can create a focused electromagnetic pulse from the core, we can overload the Veshtari ship's systems temporarily. We'll disrupt their ability to track us, at least for a few minutes." Bradford's eyes narrowed, processing the plan. "It's risky. If we do it wrong, we could fry our own systems." "I know," Elena replied, her fingers already moving to the comm system. "But we don't have a choice. If we don't act now, they'll breach the hull before we can do anything. We need to buy time, long enough to get the Astrium secured, and maybe even launch a counterattack." Bradford nodded, his face hardening. "Do it, and make it fast." Elena turned to Lieutenant Voss. "You and I are going to the reactor. We'll need to interface with the power conduits manually. You'll need to set up a direct link to the weapons grid." Voss looked uncertain for a moment, then gave a tight nod. "Understood. Let's move." As Elena and Voss headed toward the reactor's access corridor, the station shuddered again, another round of fire slamming against the shields. Elena felt a cold chill creeping up her spine. The Veshtari weren't going to give up. Every blast brought them closer to death. But this was their best chance. If they could pull off the EMP burst, it might give the Pioneer a fighting chance. Reaching the reactor's core, Elena immediately began accessing the control panel. The hum of the massive engine beneath her feet felt more alive than ever, a reminder that it was their only hope of survival. "We're on the clock," Elena muttered, her hands moving quickly over the controls. "If we're going to do this, we need to generate enough power to overwhelm their systems. I'll reroute energy from the auxiliary reactors to create a pulse strong enough to reach their fleet." Voss watched her, his face tense. "What's the risk?" "Elena, we could short-circuit the entire power grid if we push this too far. The Pioneer could lose power completely. we'd be sitting ducks." "I know," she said, not looking up from her task. "But we won't have power left anyway if the Veshtari breach the hull. We'll be dead long before that happens. This is our shot." Voss hesitated for just a moment longer before turning to assist her. "Let's make sure we don't fry ourselves in the process." They worked in silence for a moment, the tension thick in the air as the clock ticked down. The hum of the Pioneer's engines resonated around them, a steady rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. It was their heartbeat. Outside, the Veshtari ships were closing in. "Almost there," Alina muttered, tapping in the final sequence of commands. The reactor thrummed, its core glowing brighter, as she rerouted the energy flow into the weapons grid. A pulse of energy shot through the conduits, a ripple of raw power coursing toward the outer weapon systems. It was the moment of truth. The plan could either save them or destroy them. Then, with a deep, resonating hum that shook the entire station, the pulse was released. The Veshtari ships reacted instantly. Their communication channels flickered, their targeting systems faltered, and for the briefest moment, the Pioneer was hidden behind a shroud of electromagnetic interference. "Now," Bradford's voice crackled through the comms, sharp with urgency. "We've got 5 minutes. Take the shot." "Powering up the weapons grid now," Voss said, his hands flying across the control panels. Alina held her breath as the EMP shielded them from the Veshtari's fire long enough to make the Pioneer a ghost in their sensors. But the question remained, would it be enough? Would 5 minutes be enough to secure the Astrium and get humanity's survival out of the hands of the Veshtari and the Enter? The station's energy hum was like the ticking of a clock, each second dragging them closer to an uncertain fate. Alina stood at the control console, her eyes fixed on the displays as the electromagnetic pulse sent ripples through the battlefield, scrambling the Veshtari's targeting systems. It was working, for now. The Veshtari ships were momentarily blind, and their weapon systems were offline, leaving them vulnerable. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor behind her, and she didn't need to look up to know it was Bradford. His presence was unmistakable, the weight of his decisions hanging over him like a cloud. 5 minutes, Alina said quietly, her fingers still dancing across the console. "We've bought ourselves time, but it won't last. We need to get to the weapons grid now. Veshtari will adapt." Bradford nodded grimly. "You've done more than enough, Alina. Let's make it count." The comms crackled to life again. Hale's voice came through, steady but tight with urgency. "Captain, the Veshtari are readjusting their systems. We have about 4 minutes before they recalibrate their weapons. They're already sending a new wave of fire. Shields are holding, but not for long." The room seemed to shrink around them as the weight of the situation settled in. They could only delay the inevitable for so long. The Pioneer was a research vessel, not a warship. Their weapons were rudimentary compared to what the Veshtari could field. This wasn't a battle they were equipped to win. But the Astrium was their last hope. "We need to get to the weapons bay, Captain," Alina said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We can't rely on the EMP forever. If we're going to do any real damage, we'll need direct firepower." Bradford's jaw tightened. "Lead the way." As the crew scrambled to their stations, Alina and Bradford moved swiftly toward the central command center, where the ship's primary weapon systems were located. The corridors seemed eerily silent, the chaos of battle outside the Pioneer's walls juxtaposed with the stillness of the ship's inner workings. The steady hum of the engine was the only thing that kept them grounded, a reminder that they were still alive, still fighting. The control room for the weapons systems was bustling with activity. Officers were typing in commands, rerouting energy, and preparing for the next phase. The massive holographic map of the surrounding space flickered as new data came in. The Veshtari ships were closing the distance, their reactivated weapons coming online. "How long until we can fire back?" Bradford barked, his eyes scanning the monitors. 30 seconds, Captain," one of the officers responded. "We're almost in range." Elena moved to the weapons grid, her mind racing. They had only one shot at this. If they couldn't hit the Veshtari before they'd fully recovered, the Pioneer would be doomed. She turned to Bradford, her face serious. We need to hit their lead ship. The rest of their fleet will fall apart without it. If we can disable their flagship, it might cause enough confusion for the Pioneer to escape. Bradford nodded. Do it. The order was simple, but the stakes were monumental. Elena's fingers flew over the controls, inputting coordinates and targeting systems. The Astrium had given them an edge, enough to channel the station's power into a focused blast, but they would need to strike fast. She glanced at the countdown on the screen. 10 seconds. The hull trembled again, another barrage of fire hitting the station's shields. The countdown continued, each passing second feeling like an eternity. They were running out of time. Elena's hands moved with practiced precision, calibrating the targeting systems to focus on the heart of the Veshtari flagship. The weapons grid was charging. Power surged through the ship, the blue energy of the weapon systems twirling into a deadly vortex. 5 seconds, came the calm voice of the officer monitoring the power surge. Weapons at full charge. The Veshtari flagship loomed larger in their targeting scopes, a massive black silhouette that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Every moment felt like the calm before a storm, and Elena knew that they were on the precipice. Now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Bradford slammed his fist down on the activation console. The entire station shuddered as the weapon's discharge tore through the void, a blinding beam of raw energy shooting from the Pioneer's weapons grid, carving a path straight toward the heart of the Veshtari flagship. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Then the beam struck. The Veshtari flagship erupted in a burst of light, a shockwave rippling outward as the energy collided with its shields, overloading them in an instant. The flagship shuddered violently, the ship's massive structure groaning under the strain. But it didn't explode. It didn't disintegrate like they'd hoped. Instead, the ship seemed to fold inward, its shields flickering and failing as the blast sent shockwaves across the fleet. We hit them, Elena said, astonished, but still unsure of the damage. Bradford's eyes were fixed on the screen, watching the flagship's movements with rapt attention. It's disabled, but not down. They're still operational. The Veshtari ships were not retreating. Instead, they were reorganizing, shifting into new formations, trying to recalculate their attack. We didn't get them all, Elena said, her voice tight. They'll adapt quickly. This isn't over. Bradford's expression darkened. No, but we've bought ourselves more time. We'll finish this. The clock was ticking, and the Veshtari were not done yet, but they had shown a crack in their armor. They had shown that the Pioneer could fight back. Now, it was up to them to press their advantage before the enemy could recover. As the countdown to their next move began, Elena could only wonder if this gamble, this final stand, would be enough to tilt the scales in humanity's favor. The war for the Astrium had only just begun. The stillness after the weapon's discharge was palpable, almost suffocating. The Veshtari flagship staggered in space, its movements erratic, as though it were struggling to regain control after the devastating hit. The rest of the fleet remained in motion, recalibrating their positions, their weapons still locked on the Pioneer. But for the first time since the battle began, there was a flicker of hope. Humanity had struck back. Elena, Bradford's voice came through the comms, clear and commanding. How much longer before their flagship recovers? Elena's fingers flew over the controls as she analyzed the damaged vessel. It's not recovering yet. They're losing power in their core systems, but the fleet is still operational. We have maybe 5 minutes before they reorient and come at us with full force again. Bradford stood silent for a moment, his eyes locked on the holographic displays as the Veshtari ships shifted their formation into a tighter, more lethal array. The flagship might have been crippled, but the rest of the fleet remained a deadly threat. Captain, Hale's voice cut through the tension. We're not going to last much longer. Our shields are at 25%. We need to make a decision now. Do we take a stand or surrender the Astrium? Bradford didn't hesitate. We don't surrender. Not to them. Not to anyone. We fight to survive. Elena looked up from her console, meeting Bradford's gaze. There was no turning back now. Their best chance at surviving lay in maintaining control of the Astrium. But the Veshteri were relentless. If they could not finish the battle now, the Pioneer would be lost. We need to do something unexpected, Elena said, her voice steady despite the intensity of the situation. Something that will make the Veshteri second-guess their next move. We have to strike fear into them. Bradford raised an eyebrow. What do you suggest? Elena didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced toward the containment chamber, where the Astrium was secured, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Humanity had unlocked something far greater than anyone had imagined when they first found the metal. She felt its weight, not just as a physical object, but as a symbol. This was more than a battle for survival. It was humanity's moment to prove that they would not bend under the pressure of a superior force. I've got an idea, Elena said, her voice quieter now, but firm. We can use the Astrium to overload the station's power grid. If we channel its energy into the reactors, we can create a burst, more powerful than anything they've seen. But it has to be done from the core. Bradford's eyes widened slightly. You're saying we use the Astrium to power our weapons, to create a full-force charge? Yes, Elena nodded. But we need to time it perfectly. If we can amplify the energy through the reactor core, it'll send out a massive pulse, one that will hit the Veshteri directly and maybe even disable their entire fleet for a short period. Bradford's jaw clenched. And the risk? If it goes wrong, we'll lose everything, Elena replied simply. But if it works, we might just be able to cripple their fleet long enough to get away, or maybe even win this battle. Bradford looked around at the crew gathered in the command center. The urgency of the situation weighed heavily on them, but there was no fear in their eyes. They were ready to follow him, ready to fight, ready to do what had to be done. He nodded resolutely. Let's do it. Prepare the Astrium for integration into the reactor. The crew sprang into action, rushing to their stations as Elena and Bradford moved toward the core. They knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of humanity. The Astrium could either be the key to their victory or their downfall. Inside the reactor room, Elena quickly interfaced with the control systems. The heart of the Pioneer pulsed beneath her fingers, and the Astrium hummed in its containment, almost as though it knew what was coming. She could feel the energy thrumming from it, a raw, untamed power that surged into her as she activated the integration sequence. Starting the power up, Elena said, her voice tense, as the system began drawing energy from the Astrium and funneling it into the reactors. If we do this right, we can send a pulse strong enough to take down their entire fleet. Bradford's hand hovered over the final command. We're about to make history, Elena. Let's make sure it's a future worth fighting for. The reactor glowed with an intensity that lit up the entire room. The energy built rapidly, a catastrophic force ready to unleash. Elena's fingers flew across the controls, calibrating the output to match the frequency they needed. The walls of the room hummed and vibrated with the immense power that surged through the station. Captain, we're ready, Elena said, her voice tight with anticipation. Bradford turned toward her, his eyes steely. Release the pulse. With a single command, the Astrium's energy was unleashed, sending a massive shockwave through the station. The ship groaned under the strain, the very bones of the Pioneer shuddering as the pulse burst out into space. The pulse shot across the battlefield, blinding in its brilliance, and slammed into the Veshteri fleet. The Veshteri ships were unprepared for the scale of the attack. Their shields faltered under the immense force. One by one, the ships of the fleet began to crack, their systems overloaded. The flagship faltered, its massive frame splintering as the energy slammed into it. It was over. The Veshteri were crippled. The battle was won. Elena watched the aftermath in stunned silence. The fleet had been defeated. The Veshtari had fallen. The Pioneer and humanity had survived.